Chapter 16, The Other London. Hermione woke up feeling exhausted the next morning. The dream had returned, more vivid and intense than before. This time, however, her eyes had been open, and she never doubted for a moment that it was him. She lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling and lost in thought. The week had been, frankly, terrible. Harry had certainly noticed her change in demeanor. After 3 days of giving him the silent treatment, she had stepped outside for some fresh air, her hands cupped around the bluebell flames she loved to conjure. That's when he approached her and said, "Look, Hermione, did something happen with Malfoy?" His voice already held a hint of suspicion, as if he were ready to confront Draco. In that moment, Hermione felt a surge of affection for Harry. She could have hugged him, but she knew that would only set his hair ablaze. "Not really," she replied. "I suppose I just got my hopes up, that's all. That he'd really changed." It was a relief to drop the facade she had been maintaining in the cottage. Harry warmed his hands over the bluebell flame. After a moment of contemplation, he said, "He seems like he has, though, doesn't he?" Hermione frowned. "In some ways. Hunting the Horcruxes, being friendly with both of us. But have you ever actually heard him contradict the things he used to say? All that pureblood nonsense?" "Well, no," Harry admitted. "I suppose he just doesn't talk about it anymore. Still, it's different from how he used to act." "Yes, but..." She couldn't find the words to finish her thought. "But it doesn't feel like enough." Voicing it would reveal too much, show how much she cared, perhaps unwillingly, about what Draco thought. Still, she sensed that Harry understood, as he often did, without needing words. She had told herself repeatedly that keeping her distance was the only solution. Soon, it would become easier to keep Draco at bay, and then she would stop thinking about him altogether. The opinions of Muggles felt like teetering on the edge of a cliff. She had convinced herself that distancing was the only way to keep safe, but doubts lingered in her mind. All week, Draco seemed off, though it wasn't obvious. He hadn't mentioned her behavior. She hadn't really expected him to, proud as he was. Still, she could sense a shift in him. Hints of confusion had given way to dissatisfaction. And through it all, he kept trying to engage her, maintaining that casual tone, as if everything were still normal between them. It was as if he believed that this time he could finally break through her defenses. On Monday, he'd even brought up one of her favorite sub-branches of arithmancy, and resisting the urge to dive into a discussion about it had been excruciating. Clearly, he viewed their relationship as something more than mere convenience. But that wasn't the main issue, she reminded herself, feeling a flicker of frustration at the tiny, hopeful bubble that had formed in her chest. The real point was his beliefs, the fact that she refused to argue for her own worth. Then, yesterday, Draco had said he would venture into Muggle London, and her thoughts had spiraled into chaos. What did that mean? He had agreed to step into a sea of Muggles without complaint, without even a sneer or a hint of disdain. Just a week ago, he had short-circuited at the mere mention of her upbringing. It didn't necessarily mean anything, she told herself. He hadn't shared his thoughts on Muggles. He had simply said he would come. And if he wanted to visit Malfoy Manor again, then he had to come, didn't he? Holding his nose out of necessity wasn't the same as change. Still, she hadn't expected him to agree, let alone without protest. That morning, it was especially difficult to maintain her frosty demeanor at breakfast. Maybe it was the new disarray of her emotions that caught her off guard. Perhaps it was because Harry was still sleeping late, leaving just the two of them at the table, the sound of cutlery clinking against their plates filling the silence. Draco looked weary and drawn, a hint of sadness shadowing his features. For whatever reason, she found herself noticing the delicate indigo circles beneath his eyes, the gentle arches of his brows, the Y-shaped contours of his ears, and the way his lower lip appeared slightly bitten. His hair was tousled, and she couldn't help but imagine its soft texture. "Didn't sleep well?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "No," she replied, her tone equally subdued. "Nor you." Draco hesitated, clearly taken aback by her willingness to engage. "No, I haven't slept well all week." Hermione didn't respond. A flutter of unease stirred within her at his tentative acknowledgement of her coldness. It felt so refreshing to converse with him like a normal person again, even if it was just for those 3 words. She missed the ease they once shared. She missed him. As the silence lingered, her longing deepened, coursing through her. She missed his little stories about his life and friends, his reluctant yet nostalgic reminiscences. She missed the way he said Granger with a light, teasing irony, and how she would banter back, enjoying the spark in his smile. She missed the way he would look away when he touched on the previous year, as if she were the only one he trusted with the truth. She missed the subtle ways he reassured her when her worries about the war consumed her, blurring her vision. She missed simply looking at him, the sharp angle of his chin, the quicksilver depth of his eyes, the lips her dreams insisted would feel slightly rough, like linen. She even missed the occasional flush of pink in his cheeks when he revealed too much and wanted to retreat. For a fleeting moment, she considered demanding to know what he meant by agreeing to come into Muggle London. But what if he gave her an answer she didn't want to hear? What if he revealed disgust or distaste? The thought felt like a stiletto knife, sharp and cutting. She felt her nerves tighten, as if they had turned into a center of anxiety. Distance, she thought, taking a deep, slow breath. For the remainder of breakfast, he didn't attempt to speak to her, which brought an unexpected pang to her chest. It's better if he's given up, she scolded herself, feeling a surge of anger directed inward. He had received the message. Now she could avoid him without causing any pain. Still, as she left the table, she sensed his gaze lingering on her. That afternoon, with the core of their infiltration plan taking shape, they began to hammer out the details. They aimed to target Umbridge in the bathroom, deciding that Hermione should attend as a guest while Harry and Draco would apply for Lizzie Spisworth's invitation. Their first idea for Hermione was to put a false name on the guest list, but altering it would require breaking into the Ministry's Office of Domestic Magical Affairs. Faking an invitation posed its own challenges. Back at Rita Skeeter's house, Hermione had attempted to duplicate or transfigure the invitation, but it had been charmed to resist both methods. They had left it behind, not wanting to draw suspicion by stealing it. Later that evening, as they sat before a warm, crackling fire in the front room, inspiration struck. Rita Skeeter's invitation had stated, "We regret that we are unable to accommodate +1 invitations for media correspondence." "For media correspondence," Harry exclaimed triumphantly. "Not for members of the Ministry. What are you suggesting?" Hermione asked, puzzled. "You want me to confund a Ministry employee into asking me to the gala?" "No," Harry replied. "Well, good, because that would be. I'll confund him, or Draco will. You just need to start a conversation." Hermione stared at him, shocked. "Not a bad idea," Draco chimed in. "I was thinking Percy," Harry said. "But, absolutely not," Hermione hissed. "I'd rather drink Bubatiber pus. How could you even suggest that?" "But he knows what your voice sounds like, so it wouldn't work," Harry pointed out. Harry hesitated for a moment. "It made me think, though. Mr. Weasley should be at the gala. Maybe we can ask him how Ron is." A wave of guilt washed over Hermione. "Yes, that's a good idea." There was a brief pause before Harry sighed. "I really thought he'd be back for the sword. He was so eager to feel like we were making progress with the Horcruxes. I thought he'd want to know." "Coming back means apologizing," Draco remarked with a cool disdain. "Are you sure he could manage that?" Harry bristled at the comment. "Ron doesn't have a problem apologizing, Malfoy, unlike some people." Hermione froze, and an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Draco shifted slowly on his cushions. "What's that supposed to mean?" Harry seemed to regret his words as his gaze darted toward Hermione. "Oh, be quiet, you two," Hermione interjected, trying to sound dismissive, as if this were just another trivial argument. For Merlin's sake, Harry, she thought, feeling furious. "I don't think Ron's at the Burrow," she continued quickly. "He must be off trying to find Hufflepuff's cup on his own. That's all I can think of. He probably wants to come back having accomplished something." Harry cleared his throat. "Right. Well, the point is we can ask Mr. Weasley at the gala." Draco was still focused on Hermione, a frown deepening on his angular features, seemingly oblivious to what Harry had just said. "And whoever asks you," Harry continued, raising his voice slightly, "it should be someone whose family is in good standing with the Ministry." He glanced at Draco. Do you know any Slytherins just out of Hogwarts who work there?" Finally, Draco shifted his attention away from Hermione and gave Harry a curt nod. "Yeah, Theonat's older brother is a trainee Auror." A sense of relief washed over Hermione, and she let out a slow breath. "Good," she thought. "Just focus on the task at hand." "An Auror is too risky," she said. "We need someone without combat training, someone who won't realize they've been confunded." "Marcus Flint, then. He's with the Department of Magical Games and Sports," suggested Harry. Hermione couldn't help but grimace. "What?" Harry asked, puzzled. "Oh, it's nothing," she replied, clearly unimpressed. "But, well, he's older. Wasn't he a 7th year when we were 3rd years? He must be around 22 now, and he's not exactly pleasant to look at," she added. Draco glanced down at his notes, but Hermione thought she caught a hint of a smirk on his lips. Hermione, Harry said, his patience wearing thin, you won't actually be getting into a relationship with Marcus Flint. Yes, well, I'll have to see him more than once, won't I? She shot back, her cheeks flushing. Once the initial confundus charm wears off, he can't just decide he felt impulsive that day and cancel by owl. He has to be, she hesitated, blushing deeper. Actually interested. And I'm sorry, Harry, but the only memory I have of Marcus Flint is when he tried to scare you off your broom by pretending to be a Dementor. Ah, Harry said with a nostalgic smile, shooting a grin at Draco. That was a fantastic match, wasn't it? I seem to recall blasting a Patronus at the four of you. Draco, who had been quiet for the past few days, raised an eyebrow and replied, Your finest moment, Potter. How'd it feel to peak at 13? Fantastic, Harry said, grinning back. Draco settled back into his cushions, running a hand through his hair. There'd have to be a reason Flint doesn't already know a pureblood girl our age. Easy, Harry said. Hermione, you can say you've just graduated from an international school and just moved here, and it would be so helpful, Hermione chimed in, adopting a low, flattering tone. If someone could show me around Wizarding London and introduce me to the right people. Yeah, Draco said slowly, nodding. Yeah, that could work, Harry said, considering their options. But he definitely has a type. Quidditch is pretty much his entire personality, and his family is really traditional. You'll need to know every little detail about pureblood rituals. Where am I even supposed to meet him? Hermione asked, a hint of frustration creeping into her voice. Cersei and Cleodna, Draco replied without missing a beat. It's a wizarding bar not far from the Ministry. Most of the Slytherin alumni gather there after work on Fridays. Flint mentioned it to me the summer before last. Perfect, Harry said, a plan forming. We'll do it this Friday then. But that only gives us a day and a half to prepare, Hermione protested. Hermione, we really don't want him asking someone else. We need to keep this under wraps, Harry insisted. Hermione sighed, realizing the truth in his words. The last thing they needed was for Marcus Flint's jilted lover to get involved and start digging into who this new girl was supposed to be. She tried to suppress the image of Draco, making jokes about that very scenario. A day and a half is plenty of time, Harry continued, gaining momentum. Tomorrow morning, we'll head into Muggle London to set up an appointment for our disguises. I doubt we can just waltz in somewhere without prior arrangements. Then, in the afternoon, I'll take some polyjuice and drop off the Spisworth applications. Draco, you can help Hermione figure out how to catch Flint's interest. We'll get the disguises done Friday morning, and you'll meet him that evening. A moment of silence followed as Hermione glanced at Draco, curious about his reaction. Yeah, he finally said. All right. His tone was almost nonchalant, but Hermione could sense the weight of it beneath the surface. Despite her attempts to extinguish it, a flicker of hope still burned in her chest, small yet bright. On Thursday morning, Draco woke up feeling queasy. He had spent hours tossing and turning the night before, nerves flaring as memories of his parents flooded his mind. It wasn't just the harsh words they had spoken about Muggles and Muggleborns. It was the way they had always held their beliefs so tightly, leaving a lasting imprint on him. They had looked at him with a constant glow of pride when he was younger. He remembered his mother letting out a broken sob as she clasped him in her arms at Grimmauld Place, the night they had faked their deaths. It was a sound he had never heard from her before. He suspected no one, apart from his father, ever had. By the time their embrace had ended, she had already composed herself, her thin, pale face rigid with suppressed emotion. He recalled his father emerging from the flu after his time in Azkaban. His mother had seemed to melt into his father's arms, and then, when Lucius looked at Draco, thin and gray-faced from the effects of the Dementors, he extended a trembling hand and pulled Draco into the embrace. For the first time in a year, nestled against his parents, Draco had felt safe. He felt like a child again, though he would never admit that it was something he had missed. His parents had given him everything he had ever wanted. They raised him with a level of love, attention, and affection that was unparalleled, even among his friends, who were generally cherished and spoiled at home. They had never asked him for a single thing, except perhaps that he become the man they had hoped he would be. Draco had never taken a step that felt so contrary to their wishes. Defecting from the Dark Lord, even hunting the Horcruxes, had been one thing. He had done that to keep the family safe, to work toward restoring their lives. But going to Muggle London was different. He tried to convince himself he was acting out of necessity, but deep down, he knew that wasn't entirely true. He couldn't lie to himself so easily anymore. That curious part of him kept whispering questions in the back of his mind, demanding to know more, to see the world where Hermione had grown up, the world that his family and friends despised so much. Maybe, he thought, he would arrive there and quickly understand why they felt such disgust. That was a possibility. Perhaps he would finally find the evidence he was seeking. Draco couldn't shake the harsh words he had always heard about muggles, being dirty, oafish, like sheep, and a disgrace for wizards to associate with. But what if those beliefs weren't true? A quiet voice in his mind whispered the question. For the first time, he wasn't sure whose voice it was. Perhaps it was his own. And he had no answers. As he stepped out of his room, he found Potter already in the kitchen cooking breakfast. "Hi," Potter said cheerfully. "Morning," Draco replied, squinting against the weak morning light. "Why are you awake? I thought we weren't leaving for an hour and a half." "We're not. I just wanted to talk to you." Draco hesitated for a moment before sitting down at the kitchen table, suddenly feeling more alert. Was he finally going to learn what Potter had meant by that comment about an apology yesterday? "Talk then," he said. Potter tapped his wand on the stove, causing the flames beneath the saucepan to shrink to small, golden flickers. He turned to Draco, his expression serious. He began, rubbing the back of his neck. "First of all, you've been a big help over the past few months. So thanks for that." "You're welcome," Draco replied, his suspicion piqued. He doubted this was just a conversation about gratitude. Potter seemed to be gathering his thoughts, taking a moment to find the right words. "Look," he finally said, "I can't be sure what's going on in your head. I don't know if you've changed your views from back in school, or if you're just keeping quiet about them now, or—" Draco's heart began to race. He wasn't prepared to discuss this with anyone, especially not Potter. Defensive words slipped out before he could think. "Good thing I don't owe you an expel." "That's not the point," Potter interrupted. Confused, Draco fell silent. "I don't need to know what you think," Potter continued. "Honestly, at this point, I don't care. You're helping us, and that's what matters." "Whatever the reason, fine," he said, crossing his arms. "But I care about Hermione. When we head into London today, tomorrow, or whenever else we need to just—" His gaze locked onto Draco's, sharp and probing, reminiscent of the day Hermione had first started giving him the silent treatment. "Whatever's been going on between you two, and I don't need to know," he added quickly. "I'm not asking. I'm pretty sure you don't want to make things worse. Am I wrong?" Draco hesitated, a sense of wariness creeping in. So, all this had been building up in Potter's mind throughout the week. That was unexpected. He gave the slightest shake of his head. Right then, Potter continued. "In that case, I'm asking you to just act normally, okay? Talk about the plan, Flint, and whatever else comes up. Ask questions. Just don't jeer at anything." "Potter," Draco replied stiffly, "I know how to be polite." "Oh, so you just chose not to be for 6 years?" "Yes, obviously." Potter's mouth twitched with amusement. "It's not like she'll answer any questions I ask," Draco muttered. "She won't say anything to me, if you haven't noticed." Potter sighed. "Yeah, well." Just then, footsteps echoed on the stairs, and Potter lowered his voice. "I'll answer the questions," he said quietly. "It'll be fine. Just don't overthink it." He turned back to the stove as Hermione entered the room, engrossed in a map of London. Draco stood stiffly, setting the table, though his mind was still churning over Potter's words. "I don't need to know what you think. I don't much care." It was strange how much relief those words brought him. With thoughts of blood status consuming him lately, he felt as if there were no safe thoughts to have. If he questioned his parents' ideals, he would be branded a blood traitor, ridiculed by everyone from his past life. If he tried to cling to those beliefs, to a headband, and Draco couldn't help but stare. The noise of the bustling street filled his ears, a cacophony of voices and laughter, a stark contrast to the quiet of his thoughts. He felt that insistent voice within him stirring again, whispering doubts and insecurities, all while he remembered Hermione's hurt expression. The turmoil within him felt palpable, as if the very walls of his privacy had crumbled, leaving him exposed to the scrutiny of Potter or Hermione. Draco had needed Potter's reminder. After all, everyone only knew what he chose to reveal. Today, he could present a facade of normalcy, even if it felt like a heavy mask. Yet, a slow panic gripped him as he prepared for their departure. When the moment came to slip their wands into their pockets, cloak themselves in disillusionment, and disapparate, he still felt unready. With a sharp crack, they landed in a puddle at the mouth of a small, dim alley, a patch of blue sky peeking down from above. All clear, Potter announced. Draco could feel the clamminess of his palms at his sides. They lifted their disillusionments and stepped into the bright, bustling street. Draco couldn't remember ever seeing so many muggles gathered together. Whenever he and his parents had ventured into London in the past, they'd always used flue powder to reach their wizarding destinations. Each year, for their trips to Diagon Alley, they'd taken him by sidelong apparition directly into the leaky cauldron. Just like his friend's parents, they'd always paid a hefty fee to apparate straight onto platform 9 3/4. The most he'd experienced of Muggle London had been through the windows of Grimmauld Place. Now, standing in the heart of a lively neighborhood, the flood of sights and sounds overwhelmed him. Muggle fashion surrounded him. Jeans in every shade of blue, oddly shaped hats snug on heads, clunky shoes splashed with neon, and coats made from shimmering fabric glistening with the remnants of the drizzle. Nearby, a pair of giggling Muggle children played with toys made of hard, shiny material that buzzed and flashed. A man hurried out of a nearby shop, sporting what looked like a pair of black earmuffs, attached by a headband that only deepened Draco's sense of bewilderment. A long cord leading to a glimmering gray oval in his hand as he hummed to himself. "All right," said Potter, clearly unfazed by the chaos around them. "Which way do you think we should go, Hermione?" "Well," she replied, "since we don't have a phone book, I suggest we ask for recommendations at the first salon we find." "Sounds good," Potter agreed. "Lead the way." Draco followed them up the bustling street, his senses overwhelmed by the parade of cars zipping by. He had seen vehicles before. The ministry had a fleet, and occasionally, officials would glide up to the manor gates in those sleek black machines. But his parents had always deemed it distasteful to use them, and they had never needed to rely on the night bus for transportation. Everything felt foreign to him. He caught a glimpse through the window of a boxy, bright yellow car, where a woman was gripping a thin, leather-bound steering wheel with one hand while adjusting a series of dials with the other. The next vehicle that passed was as different from the first as a flying carpet is from a broom. A clunky, roaring contraption with a 15-foot-long metal box affixed to its end, rumbling along on a dozen tires. "There!" Hermione exclaimed, pointing across the street. "Come on!" Without hesitation, she stepped onto the shiny black pavement, right into the path of a moving car. "Wait!" Draco blurted, grabbing her by the elbow. She turned to him, clearly bewildered. "What?" It was." He gestured at the blue car that was slowly rolling by, the driver giving him a puzzled look. "It's still moving." "Yes, at about 5 miles an hour," Hermione replied, raising an eyebrow. Draco opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, unsure. "They'll stop to let you cross if traffic's this slow," Potter chimed in, looking highly amused. "They're not just going to run you over. Look." With that, he jogged onto the black road, waving at the next driver who came to a halt. Potter crossed safely to the other side. "Ah." Draco realized his fingers were still curled around the cord in his hand, a small anchor in this bewildering new world. Hermione's arm before letting go. "Right." She made a funny noise that quickly turned into a cough. Draco felt his cheeks flush as he followed her across the street, and the three of them pushed into a hair salon. Inside, he felt even more out of place. All around him were silver machines, some resembling hoops, others like bowls. Many lowered over the heads of seated Muggle women in black aprons. "Good morning," Hermione greeted brightly, addressing the woman at the front counter. The woman looked up from her magazine, taking a long, startled glance at Hermione's bushy hair. When her eyes moved to Potter's hair, her expression shifted to one of dread. But when she finally turned to Draco, her demeanor softened. "Here for an appointment?" she asked, directing her question at him. "Or are your friends?" Draco's entire body tensed. This was the first time he'd ever spoken to a Muggle. The closest he'd come before was during the Quidditch World Cup, where his parents had done all the talking while he observed from the sidelines with morbid curiosity. He glanced at Hermione and Potter, both watching him with unreadable expressions. Turning back to the Muggle woman, he noted her shiny dark hair, reminiscent of pansies, and the metal stud in her eyebrow. Some sort of Muggle religious symbol, perhaps? "No," he said finally. "We're looking for a studio specializing in facial prosthetics." She blinked. "Facial what?" Hermione cleared her throat. "Prosthetics. We're film students, and we're wondering if you had any recommendations." The woman's initial disapproval faded, and she rubbed her chin thoughtfully. "What are you trying to look like?" Vampires? Draco blinked at her, taken aback. No, Potter interjected. We don't need monster makeup or anything like that. We're just trying to look like different people for our film. Try Leo Clifton's. A go. It's over in Kensington, right near the Notting Hill station. As soon as they stepped outside, Draco asked, what did she mean, vampires? It was hard not to feel a bit miffed. His father had liaised with a vampire enclave in Germany, and none of the vampires Draco had encountered looked anything like him. In fact, they hadn't exactly been paragons of good looks either. Well, muggles don't think they're real, obviously, Potter replied as they walked down the street. And vampires are always really pale in muggle movies. Why are they pale? Draco questioned, glancing at Hermione, who seemed to be observing the shop fronts with a studied disinterest. I dunno, Potter shrugged. I suppose it makes them look like they haven't got any blood? But they do have blood, Draco countered. Just because it's not circulating doesn't mean. Yeah, well, how are muggles supposed to know the details? Potter interrupted. Feeling increasingly agitated, Draco spotted another person walking by, wearing those strange black earmuffs and holding a shiny gray oval object. What are those earmuffs for? He blurted out, unable to hold back his curiosity. It's not that cold. They're headphones, Potter explained. You can listen to music through them. It comes out of the CD player, the gray thing. CD player? Draco echoed, fully aware of how foolish he sounded, almost childish, but he couldn't help himself. After weeks of trying to comprehend the Muggle world, how it functioned and what it was like, he was finally here, immersed in it. A sense of urgency washed over him, like he was trapped in a dream, desperately needing to solve a puzzle before he woke up. Besides, Potter had encouraged him to ask questions, hadn't he? Wouldn't it be even more foolish to pretend the world around him didn't exist? Back at headquarters, he could act as if he wasn't preoccupied with muggles. But now, with everything pressing in on him, there was nothing else to focus on. A CD is something that holds music, Potter explained. It's been recorded onto it. He struggled to find the right words. Then Hermione chimed in. Imagine an echo charm, she suggested, but cast on a disc. If you put the disc into a player, it'll play the song as many times as you'd like. Draco glanced down at her. She was facing away, her voice carrying an intensity that hinted at a clemency. He remembered her saying, "It's the Muggle National Health Service." Suddenly, it felt pointless that he hadn't asked more questions then. Come on, she urged, slipping into an alley. With a quick apparition, they found themselves entering a shop with a sign that read, Leo Clifton, professional makeup for the stage and television. A little bell tinkled as they stepped inside. Give us a minute, a voice called from the back. Thanks, Hermione replied. Draco took a moment to survey the shop. Leo Clifton's store was lined with shelves, each filled with various bottles, most containing paint. Other shelves displayed makeup that looked similar to the lipsticks and eyeshadows his mother once kept in a cabinet at the manor. Posters adorned the walls, showcasing those unmoving Muggle faces, advertising what must have been the movies Hermione had mentioned. At first, Draco found the still images unsettling, but he couldn't help but be drawn in. Although the photographs didn't move, he felt as if he were slowly deciphering their stillness, noticing subtle expressions in a squinted eye or an open mouth, details he might have overlooked if the subjects were animated. Just then, a small man with neatly combed chestnut hair emerged from a back room, pushing up his glasses with an apologetic smile. So sorry for the wait, he panted. We're a bit short-handed today. I'm in the middle of fixing up a minotaur and a 3,000-year-old alien. Molds are setting now, so what can I do for you? Leo Clifton greeted, extending his hand to each of them in turn. Draco hesitated, lifting his hand only halfway before Leo seized it, shaking with great enthusiasm. The man's handshake was cool, dry, and confident. Lovely to meet you, Hermione said, introducing herself. I'm Penelope Clearwater, and this is Neville Longbottom and Stan Shunpike. We're film students, and we're trying to look like different people for a short film we're shooting over the next month. Different people, huh? How different? Leo asked, his curiosity piqued. We'd like to be completely unrecognizable, Hermione replied. We're trying to fool our acting class. Also, Potter chimed in, Stan and I would like to look around 10 or 15 years older. Leo Clifton studied the three of them intently. Draco shifted uncomfortably under the man's piercing gaze, as if he were examining marble blocks he intended to carve. Well, the hair will have to go for starters, he said. I could cover your faces, and I'd still recognize all three of you from a mile away. You, he waved a hand at Draco, could get away with dye, but you too. Well, that wouldn't really work under wigs, would it? We'll straighten this. He gestured over Hermione's head as if casting a wandless spell. And shave you, I think, Neville. Potter startled. Shave? Clifton smiled. It grows back. Bald caps are more trouble than they're worth. The rest should be easy enough. His eyes flicked back to Draco. Your bone structure will need some disguising too, so we'll give you a nice full beard and bronze up that complexion. As he pulled out a notepad, he began jotting down notes, glancing between them and muttering things like, new nose for you, I think, and light-eye bags should do the trick. The man reminded Draco more and more of Ollivander, a true artist who evidently loved what he did. Leo Clifton spoke with the confidence of someone who had honed his craft for decades, treating his vocation like a second language. As he discussed payment with Hermione, Draco's gaze was drawn to a section of the wall he hadn't noticed before. Instead of posters, it was adorned with news clippings. One headline read, "The Man Behind the Monsters," accompanied by a full-page photo of a beaming Clifton. Another magazine cover proclaimed, "The Face of Britain's Faces," featuring Clifton holding a statuette at a podium, his smile radiating joy. In that moment, it struck Draco that he might be standing in the studio of a famous person. With the vastness of the Muggle world, 200 Muggles for every wizard, it dawned on him that he could very well be conversing with someone more widely recognized than any wizard in Britain, someone even more famous than Harry Potter, Albus Dumbledore, or even the Dark Lord himself. A wave of lightheadedness washed over Draco, as if he had just kicked off from the ground at the start of a Quidditch match, but had left part of himself behind. He felt himself drifting, looking down at the entire world below and grappling with his own insignificance amidst the sheer enormity of Muggle civilization. Billions of Muggles, of whom Leo Clifton was just one. After 17 years of dismissing anything outside the wizarding world as utterly unremarkable, virtually non-existent, Draco suddenly felt minuscule. He thought he might need to sit down. Tomorrow, then. 11 sharp. Looking forward to it, Ms. Clearwater. Leo Clifton flashed his brilliantly white teeth once more and jogged toward the back room, calling out, "You'd better not have touched those noses." Draco trailed behind Hermione and Potter as they left the shop. Blinking in the cold November sunlight, he felt dazed. He looked around at the Muggles bustling past, catching snippets of their conversations as friends and families hurried down the street. The most beautiful car, bloody expensive, obviously, but she's always been rude, Jane. Always. Always. Didn't I tell you? Hand back the reports by next week at the latest. Mum, you're not looking. Mum. Draco felt his daze giving way to a sense of numbness. It seemed silly and trivial, but two words echoed relentlessly in his mind, just people. They were people he might hear walking down the street in Diagon Alley, individuals caught up in their jobs, lives, and families. Parents as protective as his own, or as indifferent as Pansy's, or as hopeful as Hermione's. He noticed weary workers longing for a day off, men in expensive watches barking orders, and a couple holding hands, gazing at each other with a warmth that Draco could almost feel. People who were irritated, laughing, sad-eyed, and devoted. "Do you fancy lunch?" Potter asked, glancing at a shop across the street that advertised chips. Hermione checked her watch. "Yes, let's. We've got plenty of time." Draco swallowed and nodded. Soon, they found themselves in a booth, and Draco was licking salt from his fingertips. The chaos in his head had quieted. Everything felt slow, calm, and almost surreal. A machine at the counter chimed with a bright, cheerful ding. He watched as Hermione's hands fidgeted with the checkered, greasy paper in its shiny red basket. "What's this?" he asked quietly, tapping his own basket. "What's it made of?" Potter hesitated, then glanced at Hermione. "Plastic," she replied. "It's a synthetic material. Not found in nature, that is." Her tone remained cautious. How is it made?" "That kind specifically, I'm not sure," she admitted. "It's a complex scientific process. This kind of plastic is different from the material used for these booths, for instance, or the cash register." She pointed to the machine that chimed again with another ding. "Right," Draco said, observing the sweaty teenager tapping the machine's buttons, was standing nearby, speaking to customers. At that moment, a particularly loud and obnoxious customer turned away, and the teenager behind the counter caught Draco's gaze. He gave the slightest roll of his eyes, clearly exasperated. Draco could almost hear him thinking, "People like that, huh? It was such a small gesture, a tiny human thing, yet it struck Draco deeply. Suddenly, his throat tightened to the point where he felt he might choke. Images flooded his mind. His parents seated at their glimmering dining table, discussing muggles with fear and disgust. The Dark Lord and the Death Eaters encircling a muggle from the village, whose body twitched and jerked in terror. Himself and his friends in the Slytherin common room, just 11 years old, laughing about the so-called filth of the muggle world and everything that came from it. That was how they had connected, the reason they felt special, different, and important. Draco realized he was sweating. He thought about all the energy he and his family had poured into hating muggles, who didn't even know wizards existed. That one-sided loathing suddenly seemed almost absurd, the behavior of the obsessed. The boy at the register, just trying to get through his day. Leo Clifton and his monster masks. The girl on the street, desperately trying to get her mother's attention. These were the people they all despised. These were the ones he'd been taught were brutish and inferior, worthless and subhuman, yet also sinister enough to threaten pure-blood existence. Draco felt as if he were detached from his own body, observing himself from across the dingy little chip shop, just a wizard in a plastic booth, small and out of place. He felt uprooted from his family's ideals and the ancient values of his house, adrift in a chaotic sea of differences he had once thought irreconcilable. But then he looked away from the counter and, to his immense relief, saw Hermione standing nearby, was watching him. Her gaze felt like an anchor amidst the chaos. He locked eyes with her, desperately hoping she wouldn't look away. Frustration flickered across her face, the same look she wore when grappling with seemingly insurmountable logistical challenges. Let her look, whispered a numb voice in his mind. Let her try to figure him out. Let her see how something inside him was crumbling, unable to hold itself together. Draco sensed he was standing on a threshold, peering into wild, uncharted territory. If he truly no longer believed in the values his family upheld, if he really was a blood traitor like his aunt, then his old life was irrevocably lost. Even if the Dark Lord fell, there would be no turning back. This new world, detached from everything he had ever known, would be all he had left. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also something else. Beyond that threshold, there was a profound stillness, quiet as a field untouched by wind. In this new reality, he imagined a life free from the cacophony of voices in his head, free from Bellatrix's incessant hissing, always reminding him of his obligations. He could think, simply think and feel, without the suffocating sensation of being watched. He could ask questions without guilt or anger, without the self-loathing that came from daring to challenge the beliefs he was raised with. He could openly care for Hermione, be friends with her without pretense, make her smile whenever he wanted, even entertain the thought of kissing her. He could want her, and it could be uncomplicated. Allowed. At that moment, she looked so beautiful to him. Her hair cascading in 1,000 directions, a scarf tossed carelessly over her shoulder, and a hint of salt and oil glistening on her lips. He longed for a world that included her. But Hermione didn't want Harry to leave the house. She fussed and fretted, delaying the inevitable. She meticulously reviewed their forged applications until mid-afternoon, just as the winter sun began to dip below the horizon. Harry finally spoke up, saying he had to go now or risk missing the submission box. The shop could be closed for the day. As she watched him disapparate, it felt like she was teetering on the edge of a high dive. Suddenly, it was just her and Draco alone in the kitchen. She fixed her gaze determinately on the sink, but in her peripheral vision, she could see him, tall, tense, and silent. The tension between them felt palpable, as if it were a physical barrier. She recalled the way he had looked at her in the chip shop in Kensington. The closest she'd ever seen to that expression was when he had been struck by the curse at the ministry. "Well, we've only got a day," she said, her voice coming out high and thin. "Come on." She gathered up parchment and a quill, and he followed her down the hall into the darkened dining room. She was acutely aware of how close his footsteps were behind her. "So," she began, busying herself with lighting the lamps. "Circe and Cleodna. In case something goes wrong, is it warded against apparition?" "No," Draco replied, settling himself at the head of the table. "Good." Hermione spread a sheet of parchment near the opposite end and made a note. "You or Harry will obviously need to come too, to confund Flint." She could feel her words rushing out, and she tried to steady her breathing. "I think 2 dates should be enough to keep him interested between the initial meeting and the gala, assuming he's actually interested. Assuming this is even possible." "It's possible." Draco flicked his wand, and a warming charm spread through the dining room. The temperature was dropping quickly, with drafts seeping in around the cottage windows. Hermione sank into the chair before her parchment, trying to concentrate. "All right, tell me what's Marcus Flint's," she grimaced. "Type." Draco shrugged. "What you'd expect. Cultured. Alluring. Aloof but flattering. Intelligent, but he'd never challenge his own opinions. Drinks strong, but not too many. You should offer him fire whiskey with Madagascan glass apple. He'd love that." He hesitated for a moment. "Beautiful," he added. "Poised," he said. "So imaginary," Hermione replied, a hint of frustration creeping into her voice. Draco's lips curved slightly, not quite forming a smile. She felt a wave of irritation wash over her. How could he appear so composed? After everything that had happened this morning and throughout the week, how was he able to sit at the end of the table looking only mildly on guard? She felt chaotic by comparison. Here. He levitated an empty fire whiskey glass from a nearby shelf, and it landed in front of her with a soft clink. "What's this?" she asked. "Practice," he said, rising to his feet. "You're at the bar. I'm Flint." "Oh, she hesitated, wanting to protest, but the reality was clear. For evenings with Flint meant 10 hours of pretending she could handle. She wouldn't have the luxury of being transfigured or polyjuiced. While she felt liberated when transformed into someone else, this was different. With her own voice and body, even if her face was completely made up, she knew it would feel more vulnerable. This was merely a logistical exercise, and it had to be useful. "Fine," she finally said, pushing her parchment aside. She squared her shoulders, trying to embody a cultured aloofness as Draco approached. He pulled out the chair beside her. "No," he said before he even sat down. "What?" she asked, confused as he stepped back to his original position. "What could I possibly have done wrong in 4 milliseconds? You looked over like you were waiting for me to sit. You can't look interested." "But you said he liked to be flattered," she countered. "Yeah," Draco replied. "But if you look eager, that's not flattering. It's only flattering if you seem unattainable, and then you give him your attention. That way, your attention is worth something, see?" "Slytherins," she muttered under her breath. This time he did smile, a small, knowing smile that made her look away, feeling a sharp twinge in her chest. As Draco finally settled into the seat next to her, she focused intently on the glass, tracing her fingertip around its rim. "Evening," he said, his voice soft and smooth. "What are you drinking?" Hermione began to turn toward him. "Slowly," Draco advised. Murmured. Her head halted mid-turn, and she took a deep breath before moving again, this time with a slower, more languid grace until she finally faced Draco. She had been so focused on the glass that she hadn't noticed how closely the chairs were positioned or that he had angled his toward her. He was hardly a foot away. Her gaze drifted immediately to his cheek, then to his arms, which were folded casually on the table, his dark jumper pushed up to his elbows. His hands were long and slender. This didn't feel like a simple logistical exercise. It wasn't until he spoke that she realized her face was flushed with heat. "I'm going to hope Leo Clifton can cover that up." "I won't be blushing tomorrow," she replied defensively, the words slipping out before she could think. He paused, his brow furrowing. "Why not?" "Because it won't be like this." "Because," she said, her throat tightening, it's just inherently silly pretending." "Well, that sounds like a lack of imagination." "This isn't about imagination. It's about preparation." After a long moment, he replied, "I suppose." Yet, in that brief silence, Hermione found herself imagining. She envisioned herself at a dimly lit bar made of dark, glossy wood, the flicker of votive candles casting a warm glow. A tall, slender cocktail sat before her, and Draco's stool was turned toward hers. He looked at her the way he had in Kensington, from across the booth, as if he would drown if she looked away. "Again," he said, jolting her from her daydream. "What are you drinking?" She tried to refocus on her character. "Fire whiskey and Madagascan glass apple." "What about why?" Still too eager. "Don't ask him questions yet. He'll want to lead." "Fine. Lead then." A hint of color crept into Draco's cheeks. "Haven't seen you here before." "You wouldn't have. I just moved. I graduated from the Multinational Wizards Academy in Dubai a few years ago. Interesting time to come to Britain." "Yes. The rising philosophy here aligns with my family's values." A long pause hung in the air as Draco stared down at his reflection in the polished wood of the table. Finally, he spoke, carefully choosing his words. "If you say something like that, you'll need to be prepared for the kind of things he'll say." He'll expect you to respond in kind. You mean about muggles? And muggle-borns? Draco nodded. It's fine, Hermione replied. I did it as Mrs. Parkinson. It's if I have to. A thick silence enveloped the room, so heavy it felt as if she could scoop it up by the handful. Then words burst from her, impossible to hold back. You don't say those things anymore. Draco went very still. You don't talk the way you used to, she continued, urgency in her voice. And this morning, when you came into London surrounded by muggles, you talked to them. You asked questions. You didn't say a word about anything. Draco remained focused on his reflection, his expression like a statue carved from alabaster, impenetrable. It was almost shocking when he finally moved, turning to face her. He looked as if he might choke on his words. In the silence that followed, Hermione sensed an invitation. She could keep pushing, keep probing where once he would have deflected. Or she could run. She could stand up, flee from the questions, the possibilities, and from Draco altogether. But she didn't move. Does it mean something, she managed to ask, that you're doing these things? Yes, he replied almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for her to ask, hoping she would. Hermione's mouth felt as dry as parchment. A cold sensation coursed through her. Was it hope? Disbelief? Longing? Or perhaps a fear stronger than ever? Maybe he could see her fear, for the intensity of his expression softened. There was wariness, yes, but also a hint of tenderness. She recognized that look. Halloween. That was what this week was. What was it about then? He asked. Words trembled on the tip of Hermione's tongue. All week, she had kept them bottled up inside, trying to build a wall around herself to stay safe. But she didn't know how to do that anymore. Her whole life had been like this. Once she cared, she couldn't make it stop. She was all in. She was her whole heart. Yes, she finally replied. I'm trying to be sensible. Because I can't be sure that you won't, that you're not going to. She felt herself rushing, stumbling over her words, but she couldn't slow down. I mean, I have to be realistic. You, of all people, should understand that I need to think about myself first. Given our history, for years, given everything, I felt I was being too. His expression tightened. Too lenient, he interjected, about my past. No, too optimistic about right now. The words were painful to utter. His actions over the last few months, the last week, even today, hadn't suggested that he would hurt her. Hermione wanted to believe that, but she had been wrong before. I'm scared, she whispered. Draco looked as though a heavy weight had settled on him. His expression was unfamiliar, a mix of pain and humiliation. After a long moment, she recognized it as shame. His voice trembled as he said, I know. A long, tense silence hung between them. He watched her, as if waiting for a verdict. Do I need to be scared? She asked, noticing the rapid pulse in his throat. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. No. Hermione searched his face and caught fleeting glimpses of uncertainty and intent, each appearing and disappearing in an instant. Then, he lifted his hand to her cheek, and her mind went blank. His fingertips brushed the spot where she had touched him on Halloween. For a moment, they lingered there, and now he looked almost afraid, as if she might vanish beneath his hand. Hermione felt as if she had forgotten how to breathe. Slowly, haltingly, she tilted her face up toward him, feeling his palm press against her cheek. Memories flooded back to the end of July, when she had tipped into the night, 1,000 feet above the Earth's dark surface. The sensation was eerily similar now, as they stood in the stillness of a silent dining room. It felt like freefall. Then, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The silence around them vibrated like an electric current. For a moment, neither of them moved, suspended in the shock of that contact. Slowly, Hermione leaned into him. His lips parted, and his hand slid into her hair, warmer and rougher than she had ever imagined. Of course, his palms would be calloused from gripping a broom handle, but this kiss was frictionless, effortless, like breathing. The tip of his nose brushed against her cheek as his mouth shifted against hers, slipping and then closing gently upon her lower lip, soft yet certain. She felt a shiver run through her, suddenly overwhelmed by warmth. Drawing a shaky breath through her nose, she caught a clean, vague scent that intrigued her, and she yearned to move closer, to know it more intimately. At the same moment, Draco reached forward with his other hand, and their wrists bumped awkwardly in midair. Hermione smiled, feeling the unevenness of his smile reflected in the kiss. They broke apart for a brief moment, laughter bubbling up nervously between them. She couldn't believe this was happening, especially after the tumultuous week they had just endured. Her heart pounded wildly, and she longed to kiss him again. His hand found her waist, while hers settled at the back of his neck, and their lips met once more, this time less graceful, more urgent. He took her lip between his teeth, his grip tightening in her hair. Hermione felt something building within her, like a shout rising from the depths of her chest, like magma surging through a volcano, or currents swirling deep in the ocean. Everything buried yet alive with motion. She needed to release it somewhere. Desperate, she grasped the front of his jumper and pulled him closer. He let out a low sound, standing to lift her into his embrace. The sudden clash of their chairs echoed loudly in the quiet room, breaking the stillness filled with unsteady breaths and the warmth of their skin. One of Draco's fingernails brushed against her scalp, while his other hand rested firmly on her back. They stumbled awkwardly toward the wall, and he pressed her against it slowly. His hands cradled her face, gently pushing her hair back as she stood on her tiptoes, fists clenched in the back of his jumper, holding him close. When he broke the kiss, they remained inches apart, his breath a soft whisper against her cheek. Hermione opened her eyes and met his gaze, her mind a soothing blank. His short, delicate lashes appeared almost translucent, and the look in his eyes, so often casual or indifferent, now held something raw and vulnerable, almost too intimate to bear. His hair had fallen over his forehead, and his lips were swollen from their kisses, looking soft and inviting. Her heartbeat thudded like a clock stuck on the hour, and she was certain he could feel it, his thumb resting gently over her pulse point. Draco closed his eyes and leaned in until his forehead rested against hers, breathing heavily. One of those breaths carried her name, barely formed and hardly more than a whisper, brushing over her lips like a gentle breeze, spilling out of him as if he hadn't even realized he had said it. In that moment, Hermione understood how exhausted she felt, as if she could lay her head on his shoulder and drift off to sleep. The week had been a whirlwind, and now they found themselves in its eye. She closed her eyes too, lifting her chin just slightly until their lips met again. It was light and warm, like rain on a sunny day. She couldn't think clearly enough to do anything more. Inside her was a feeling of disbelief, like helium lifting her slowly upward, dizzy and elevated toward something as vast as the sky. When she finally let the kiss break, Draco leaned in and kissed her once more, just as softly, placing his lips on hers for a fleeting moment, like. He longed to tell her, I understand, I feel it too.